Welcome to Philosophy Cafe, where we dive into the philosophy behind the art and the artist. Today we have Jenna Bitar. She's the founder of Cafe Organic, and from experience, some of the best coffee in the world. She runs Ranico Atelier, a lifestyle clothing brand. She is co-founder at Unit Network, building out the tokenized stakeholder economy. But we won't be talking about that. She has so many more ventures of the liking. We will be talking about her creative craft of painting, particularly a piece that is going to be showed in New York this May 6th and May 4th for 2 weeks from there. So there's so much going on in her world. I'm so excited to dive in. She is also a very, very dear friend of mine. And I just want to say hello. How are you, Jenna?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Absolutely. It is really such a pleasure. I know today I don't have a coffee. It's a little bit later on my end because Jenna is joining us out from Bali. So really cool. We're able to coordinate together. Just to touch a little bit onto the coffee talk, being that we are having a cafe setting, what are some of your, what's the best way for you to start your day in the coffee shop?
To be honest, I've actually switched my coffee over for matcha lately, and the addiction's going pretty strong. It's
Really?
actually kind of a funny thing, but I started off with absolutely hating matcha back in 2015 when I first opened the cafe. But I added it to the menu because I wanted to cater to the people who actually wanted matcha in the morning. But yeah, it was definitely not something I liked. And then I sort of grew my palate to liking it, and then I went from loving it to hating it again, and now I love it again. So much like my paintings, actually.
So that is the life of an artist right there. I think you defined it
Just
eloquently.
a bit of a roller coaster.
I I can only imagine. Well, as everyone knows, Bali is huge for their coffee
It
culture. I was
is,
so
yeah.
glad to have the opportunity to immerse myself in that, and you're such a huge proponent of the entire space.
Thank you. Thank you
But
so much.
today we are going to talk about an ode to free will. What a
Yes.
beautiful, astounding, creative piece that you have. If you could just initially tell me just a little bit about how that got started and what your inspiration was for getting involved with that.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually quite a funny story. My artist journey um, kind of started about a year ago now, so it's still quite recent. I'm very new to the industry and to the art itself, and I feel like I'm still learning every day. And it's with every
Hmm.
experience, I'm sort of, you know, growing more of like a pool of knowledge on techniques and mediums, and I'm just really exploring and having fun with it. But it all started with this one piece that I did on a random Saturday morning in my living room, and I was drinking chai tea that morning.
Oh, that was
um,
the choice.
yeah, actually, randomly sipping on chai tea, and I had burnt toast in my living room. Now, they might seem like inconsequential details, but they're very much key aspects to the end result of the piece that I did. Because looking back, I was looking at the canvas and I thought to myself, wow, this looks exactly like HIT with like the texture of the burnt toast, because it was a very textural piece. It had these neutral tones of colors,
Okay.
um, you know, varying from different shades of brown, sort of like fudge and all these colors that were, if you look back at a cup of chai tea and you see the spices and you see the the pieces of clove or cinnamon, or especially if you brew your own chai tea at home, and you have that in your kettle, the painting very much resembled that in all of its organic shapes and textures. And I thought to myself, it's insane how intuition works, and how we're such products of our environment. Because obviously the burnt toast scent invading my living room must have subconsciously, influenced me to create a piece that was very
Absolutely.
much of the like of what I was experiencing on the moment. Yes,
Without even
without even
realizing.
realizing.
That's what's so
Yeah, like
fascinating.
at no point was I, consciously deciding on a palette of color, or at no point was I, okay, I'm gonna I'm gonna paint a brown painting and it's gonna be textural or this and that. It just randomly really just flowed out of me. And then I looked back on the piece and I was pretty pleased with it. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna put it up on my wall. About a week later, my mom comes in my living room. She sees the piece, and we had discussed the fact that I needed a new Insta mural for the cafe. So, as you know, Cafe Organic being um, quite present on, on the social media platforms, needed a new
Of
Insta
course.
mural. And I took the opportunity during the pandemic to renovate the whole space, and I needed a new feature wall. And I wasn't sure the previous one would fit, even though it had aged beautifully. It was this mural of aqua colors, cactuses. It just didn't fit with with the new aesthetic, and I wanted something very cohesive. So I was hesitating on between an installation and this and that. And then when my mother saw the painting, she was like, "Jenna, you should just make a large piece for the cafe." So I attempted that.
Oh.
And on my third attempt, I managed to get it right. So I put it up, and ever since putting it up, I just got a lot of interest. It sort of grew organically from there,
Mm.
decided to take it more seriously. And then a dear friend of mine who's actually a very successful artist took me under his wing. He was really pushing me to open my own Instagram account for my art. And from there, it kind of just, yeah, really grew organically. So that's really how it started, is with the random Saturday morning chai tea burnt toast painting.
Look at that. What a
Yeah.
story. And see, Mama always knows
Mama
best.
knows best.
That's the moral of the story there.
Absolutely.
Well, it's so fascinating because you touch upon a really interesting topic, one that we've had multiple times before, and something that you continue to teach me in my life is this duality between intuition and critical thinking. And you seem to navigate that space extraordinarily well, something that I'm still trying to gain my footing in. So I'd just like to know, in the mind of Jenna, when you're in your space, the one that you're in right now, what's it like for you to navigate that intuition, but also know consciously what it is that you're doing? Because this is an ode to free will. So does it
Yeah.
somewhat inspire a sense of conscious choice, or is free will simply based on intuition?
Wow, that is an extremely difficult question to answer, because the fact that I do things intuitively is explicative of the fact that I don't think about them. So I've never actually consciousized any
Yes.
of this. I've never sat there and thought, you know, what is the best practice? How do I find a middle ground between the two? I just do. But yeah, I mean, very, very tough to answer how to navigate between the two. I feel like it's just, I mean, intuition as a whole is a difficult concept to grasp and to explain. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's like quote unquote scientifically proven and can be explained, but I definitely believe that it's a thing, and we embody it when we're in a state of flow. But again, even that is very abstract, right? So um, I don't think that I conscientize sort of these actions between, okay, when am I going to use critical thinking, and when am I going to use intuition? It's just very much perhaps a practice of, or at least to me personally, I believe that to be more in touch with your intuition and with your gut instinct, you have to be in touch with nature. And so that's sort of the story behind an ode to free will, is a play on words with an
Mm.
ode to nature and free will, because the concept of intuition, I think, lies between the, and we'll expand on that with free will, but it's also something that we gain and we grow through being in contact with nature. And so there's very much
Mm. Love that.
this polarity and this duality between nature and intuition, and I want to evoke that through my paintings, and I want them to be sort of almost like a wake up call for people to be more in touch with nature, to get that connection with mother nature, to spend more time in nature. um, and so yes, an ode to free will is kind of a call to spend more time in nature, and with that we naturally gain more intuition because we're more in touch, we're more grounded, we're more in touch with who we really are. and
Yeah.
um, and vice versa. I think that intuitive people have a call for nature, they need nature. An anecdote on that is, I recently was in Dubai, which, as we know, is an artificially made city in a very arid
Yeah.
uh, type of nature. It's a desert. And so a lot of the time spent indoors or in buildings, and when you're not, you're sort of surrounded with a barren landscape. There's no trees per se, and even though it is nature and it has absolutely its own beauty, um, it's very different. Well, at least specifically for me, who's grown up, in an equatorial, very, I mean, jungle, rainforest type of landscape,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
almost crave that and I need that. And it was very evident to me when I was in Dubai, because I was, um, I was really craving it. And then, funnily enough, I walked into a bookstore And the first book that I picked up was called Losing Eden by Lucy Jones, which I haven't gone through enough to be able to fully recommend it yet, but very interesting read on the need for people to spend time in nature for the psyche, to release serotonin, to find a happy state.
Yeah.
And it's very scientific. It's a scientific read on, going into the details of how our pores open up to absorb micronutrients in the atmosphere, which reacts symbiotically with our bodies to release serotonin, to be happier, for overall like mental health. So it's quite interesting how close of beings we are to nature, and how we need it and how we interact with it. The negative ions of the ocean and things like
For
that. So
sure.
yeah, really interesting. So
Absolutely. Well, it's also a tribute to the fact that so much of what you do is greatly bound by intuition itself, right? It's this ethereal, but also very much in tune sense of self that you're able to express through your work. And that whatever happens to come out as a result wasn't necessarily planned, but it was the truest version of
yeah,
you. And when it comes to nature, I find that very interesting because it implies that nature has an intelligence that we don't. So when we tap into nature, it will give us the free will that is congruent with who we are, with what we want to express, with our soul, if you may, or the psyche, as you
yeah,
had referred to. And that is what evokes that intuition. And maybe looking at it from a polarized standpoint of critical thinking sits on one side of the scale and intuition on the other is actually a faulty approach. Maybe they don't sit on opposite sides of the scale. Maybe intuition is one with critical thinking
mm-hmm.
because that is the highest form of cognition that we can experience in this form, perhaps,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So very interesting ideas to toggle with there. So in that case, would you be able to guide me through what you're feeling in the moment when you were painting an ode to free will?
Um, it's funny because it's not a particular feeling, and it's very difficult to describe because it would almost be blank. Um, in this,
Oh,
yeah, in the
cool.
sense that I'm very much like in the zone, and I'm not really thinking. I'm just doing, and then, but obviously there are a lot of thought processes throughout the the painting, because I'll be looking at a certain corner and then I'll be adding to that or changing this, and so obviously I am thinking throughout the process. It's just that you're very much in the zone, so it's difficult
Hmm.
to describe, to be honest. And in fact, I had my first kind of artist block a couple days ago. Came in the studio and I was trying to work on this piece and I just wasn't pleased with it. So I kind of stopped and I wasn't sure how to go about it. And I was very much in my critical thinking phase, I guess, in that perspective, because I was actively thinking about how to alter it instead of being in this flow state where I'm just doing and it's happening. But to be frank, sometimes I look back on my piece and I think, wow, how did I get there? How did I do that? And would I be able to recreate?
Yeah,
Yeah,
retrospectively.
and would I be able to recreate it? Like, I have no idea how I got to this point. Like, how did I do this? And this is why sometimes I try and take these mental notes while I'm doing, and like quickly hop onto my phone, into my notes app, and jot them down to remember some of the processes and techniques that I've created while being in that flow state. It sounds like a mind altering process.
We're tapping into new frames of mind. We're evolving in real time.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I'll just be, it's experimentation and it's fun and it's not. I just kind of play around really, and then sometimes I'll have to remember how I did certain things to be able to recreate them, or like put notes. In fact, yesterday I voice noted to myself so that I would remember some of the techniques that I had used on a piece that I was pleased with, so that if I ever find that artist block again, it can sort of work as a reminder to all the different ways that I can go about to get back into that creative flow.
Oh, I see. So you already proactively set yourself
Yeah,
some space to be able to get over that next hump, because every artist and any and who's involved in any creative craft is going to come up with some sort of block.
yeah,
So and I guess you found a way to shift that block by allowing your intuition to speak through, by allowing your flow to become much more
yeah,
accessible to you in the
exactly. And
moment.
I think it's the only way. You have to like find, um, you have to find what works for you and sort of Like for me, it's really about putting down reminders of what are the different ways to go about getting back into the flow state. And I don't have like a ritual or anything. I've noticed actually that thing that I do when I walk into the studio is I'll look at each of the pieces that I've done in the past and sort of like study them. And it's funny just even explain this, to be honest, because it occurred to me as I was doing it. So it's something that I do completely naturally. I walk into the studio, I look at each of the pieces, and I'm like studying them, pondering on them, and I just sit there in silence for quite a while in front of each piece. And then at certain ones will probably attract me more than others, or like certain parts of one. And then I'll stand back and it's almost like, okay, I'm ready to get into it. And then I'll go and get my tools and
Oh, so you're like you're
yeah,
generating, you're conjuring up that
yeah, it's
energy.
super funny. I'm literally, it's exactly what's happening. And I don't usually produce something that I already have. Like I'm almost incapable of doing so, which is pretty wild because sometimes I'm like, oh, I'd love to have a second one of these, but it just either comes or it doesn't. And yeah, like I won't even be producing anything similar to what I've done before, but I'll have that moment where I'm really like generating, as you said.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
interesting. So, if we even take a further step back, what is it about painting specifically that you've developed an affinity towards?
I think that's a really good question as well. In comparison to another craft that I tried, which was pottery, I think
Hmm.
pottery I just didn't click with. I don't really enjoy it, and even though the idea of it is very appealing to me, I'd love to have like a pottery studio. I romanticize the whole idea of having your own pottery studio
Yeah.
and creating your little pieces. And I'm such a fan of ceramics, and I'm such a fan of pots and bowls, and I love crockery. But I just didn't click with it, and I think it's like very much a slow paced uh, art that requires a lot of patience. Whereas with my paintings, I can go at any speed I want. I can, I can really like throw in some texture or some and like mix the paint kind of like I guess I can really get into it in a different pace. Whereas you have to be very meticulous with pottery, and I'm not a very meticulous person. Um, you have to be, yeah, and even though there are details involved with my paintings and the way I shape certain textures to mimic organic shapes naturally occurring in nature, it's yeah, I guess I get to really hit that flow state when I'm painting, and it hasn't happened with pottery. I don't know if I could compare it to any other art. I guess yeah, it's something that I really find a lot of enjoyment doing, and I haven't really found that with other crafts for some reason.
Oh, okay. So it was a little bit of trial and error, but you knew it. You felt it when when you hit that sweet
Yeah, like
spot.
I just enjoyed it, and I was inspired, and I had that creativity. Whereas often with pottery, I would sit there and have a block of clay and not really know what to do, and it would kind of just be, it's just not the same. I feel like some people prefer some crafts and others.
Exactly. Yeah, whatever you
Yeah,
resonate with. Do you find that relationship you have with with doing things at your own pace is synonymous with so many other arenas of your life as well, or is
definitely.
this strictly for painting?
No, definitely. I, I mean, I started my first business quite young, and I think that that was kind of a token for how I needed to do things at my own pace and do things myself. I'm very much, I just like to rely on myself and know and like kind of go forward at the pace that I want. I feel like perhaps because every individual needs to go at their own pace, it could sort of hold people back or go too fast for them. And there's that need for
Yeah.
maturity of a project, of an idea, and sometimes, and I like, yeah, I think it's very much applied to every other aspects of my life for sure.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you know that that's like a very much core value of yours. You need to have that as a
I
pattern, as
mean,
a form for everything that you
absolutely.
take
And
on
you
in
just
your
pointed it
life.
out. Like, had you not, I probably wouldn't have realized.
Well, that's what's so fascinating about this is we're trying to see what are the parallels in one's life and how they're able to apply that into all their creative endeavors, right? And I think that is very philosophical in
Mm-hmm.
nature.
Totally.
So, and now when we synthesize this, bring this back down into an ode to free will. What was it like the moment you finished? How did you know the painting was
Okay, well,
done?
that's also a really good question because when it comes to abstract, there is no finish line, and a piece can be, yeah, I mean, a piece
Exactly.
can be worked to infinity. You could keep adding, you could keep changing. It can take different. aspects. But I think there's a point where you need to really pull the trigger, and that's very much something that can be applied to any craft. Like, in music making, when is a song really finished? Like, it can be an ever evolving. So
Hmm.
I think at one point you just have to pull the trigger and say, for me, I guess it's been when I'm pleased with the final result, but
Yeah.
but then often I found myself coming back into the studio and having matured the piece a few weeks later, or a few months, or whatever it may be, or even days, I can come back into the studio and think, okay, no, this needs to be reworked. I'm going to change it. And it's subjective. So some people have come into the studio and purchased a piece that wasn't even finished because for them it was absolutely perfect the way it was. So,
Oh,
yeah,
wow,
absolutely. I
really?
think it's
Yeah, and that's as you tapped into abstract. That's so much my realm. That's what I love when it comes to writing is the abstraction. And it's so true. You never really know. There's no parameters by which it's like, okay, you've completed analyzing this abstraction or expressing this abstraction. It's like an ongoing flow of creativity, of expression.
yeah.
And it's so interesting. The way that I look at it is with some of my personal work is I try to view it as in, well, how would I present this if there was a due date? Because that's the only way I could really stop myself and say, okay, this is done. Because when I look back even at school, it's like there's so many times where I'd rush and I'd be so particular about how I want to hand in an assignment or a project. I'd be like, well, there's a deadline. So I kind of have to apply that to every aspect of my life where there is not a deadline so I can at least finish it or put the cap on it right now.
Yeah.
So I found that to be very useful for me. But again, you might always tap into it. There could be those pieces, whether it's writing, art, music, that you just put in the back of the shelf for a few years and then touch back on again when you feel the
Yeah,
time is right.
totally. Um,
Yeah.
I guess for me, with some of the artworks that aren't finished and that I'm not pleased with, like I said earlier, it's a bit more difficult for me to get into them because it's no longer a blank canvas. There's no longer like the endless possibilities. And some people prefer that because it gives them a framework. With architecture, for instance,
Exactly.
when you're limited by certain trees that have to stay there, or if there's like say a pool that's already built, then you're very much limited to the options that you can do. Um, um, in terms of like the build of the house. But if you're set with like a blank canvas, like a piece of land that's flat, then you can really go all out. So I think with some people, I guess they like the challenge and it makes them think. With some people, they feel restricted. With some people, if there's like such different, avenues to go about it. And I mean, for me, it definitely makes me feel restricted and I'd prefer a blank canvas.
Literally,
Yeah.
yes. So as we can see, we are in your beautiful studio.
Yes.
You see a little glimpse of it right there behind you. Could you tell me what elements you absolutely need to have to get into your flow state?
Um, I mean, other than my tools,
Other than the actual tools to create, what does the atmosphere look like for you? What have you curated there for yourself? What is the painting of the whole studio that has allowed you to create the singular
I mean,
paintings on a day to day?
I'm really fortunate to have a beautiful studio, and of course, aesthetics play a big role because, in general, I love being
Hmm.
surrounded by aesthetics, and being in a beautiful environment is inspiring. There's a lot of trees in the studio. It's very bright. There's natural lighting. I'd say natural lighting is the key answer to your
Okay.
question. Natural lighting is everything, because despite the studio being very beautiful, prior to it having AC installed, it was extremely hot. And I was
I can imagine.
dying in the heat.
But Jenna, my goodness, thank you so, so much. If others worked, created in a manner that you do, I believe so many people would be able to see with so much more color on their canvas. So thank you for being you, and thank you for sharing an ode to free will today. I really appreciate you, and I hope we get to do this again soon.